There, and welcome once again to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Meyers. We're here every week meeting interesting people and dealing with topical issues. And today we're going to kind of have a go into course, Business 101, inflation.
Yes, consternation.
Something that affects everybody.
We have entitled this show Inflation Consternation because we keep hearing about it, and we keep hearing about how awful it is for certain reasons that don't sound quite so awful.
Yeah. So what caused it? When's it going to go away?
Yeah.
We have a lot of questions.
Yes,
today.
we do. Now, we're going to talk about probably about half the show with Dr. Oller on inflation. It won't be the entire show. And then we'll get into what's going on out at UCO and with the students and that for the second half.
Jeremy Oller is our guest today on inflation. We'll be right back.
Right now, 6 feet can feel like a long ways away. But from 6 feet, we can still smile at each other. From our doorways and our stairways, from opposite sides of the street and opposite sides of the country. Through fear and frustrations, we can remind each other that we are still here for each other. Because we can still smile at each other. And we're not going anywhere.
Military service ran in my blood, starting from my father, which joined the Navy, but on the Chickasaw side, my uncle, which served in the United States Army. I'm Benjamin Espinosa, Chief Petty Officer, United States Navy, and I'm Chickasaw. I went to the Secretary of Defense's staff at the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., which ultimately led to becoming a combat support technician for Naval Special Warfare, specifically SEAL Team 10. I think to be proud and to love your tribe, to love being Chickasaw, you also have to love being American. You also have to love everything that America stands for. Equality, perseverance, professionalism, and power. I want my family to know that their father is a good person, but also feels that he has an obligation to the country and to love this nation. Anything worth having is worth dying for. The military and the country owes me nothing. I owe it everything.
See more stories about the Chickasaw people at profilesofanation.com.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Meyers. Kent's going to introduce today's guest.
Well, we're very pleased to have Dr. Jeremy Oller joining us for his fifth time on The Verdict. Dr. Oller did his undergraduate work at the University of Oklahoma, did his law work at the University of Oklahoma. I was pleased to have him in one of my classes, and I can say that without reservation, he's already on the show, so I'm not saying it to get him on the show, but he was one of the best students I've had in many, many years at OU teaching. Did his PhD work at the University of Oklahoma in economics. He engaged for a number of years in the practice of economics with Don Murray and some other known economists around here. He has been chair of the Department of Economics at UCO. He is now dean of the College of Business at UCO and has been since 2021 and is carrying on today and took a little time off to come join us. Jeremy, thanks so much. And by the way, although we're a week late, Merry Christmas to you.
You too, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, sure. Well, you know, a lot of people probably heard the beginning of this show when we talked about what we're going to talk about today, and it's just a word that everybody seems to dread because no one likes to go to the store and pay more this week than they paid last week. So let's talk about inflation and maybe start with the definition of the term. When you, as an economist, what does the term mean academically?
Academically, in the most relevant terms, it just means the price level is increasing. So what you essentially have is a reduction in purchasing power for consumers. So if I had $100 today, then tomorrow that $100 is not going to buy me as much as it did today. And so you just start to see the price levels increasing, decreasing purchasing power for consumers, and that's why if you hear that term and there's frustration, that's why, because they're starting to see that they don't get as much as they could have bought yesterday.
And there's always some natural progression of prices. You know, it seems like it is just, but all of a sudden it went up on a much completely different curve.
Absolutely. Usually the Fed tries to peg or target inflation, I can't say peg, I'd say target, around 2%. Some inflation is actually a healthy thing. You don't want an economy with no inflation or deflation. For instance, if the value of the dollar, or if deflation was occurring in an economy, what you'd start to see is people wouldn't spend their money, because I would perceive prices tomorrow to be lower than today, so I'd hold my money now and I wouldn't spend anything. And so you wouldn't have a healthy economy if you had zero inflation either.
And obviously, from an economic standpoint, when prices go up, people buy less.
Absolutely.
And it slows the economy.
Yes.
Yeah. So how do we get out of this?
How do we get out of it? That's a challenging question. I remember thinking about 2 years ago, the Fed was saying this was transitory or temporary. I didn't think that to be the case, because what you really have is kind of a cacophony or a variety of factors causing this thing. So to me, what it's going to take is a lot of different policies, but you don't want to overreact, because if you pump the brakes, what you're going to do is halt the economy, send it into a massive recession, and I don't think anybody wants that either.
Now, empirically speaking, if inflation was matched with wage increases of relatives the same size, inflation would be meaningless, would it not?
Well, if everybody in the economy
Yes.
was making wages that increased at the rate of inflation,
Yeah.
then yeah, it'd probably be the same.
But that obviously does not happen.
No, and especially when you think of people on fixed incomes, that's who inflation can be really hard on. I mean, they bear a lot of that burden because their income isn't increasing, but their cost is increasing.
Well,
But
the reason, I guess, that costs are increasing is that people are buying. If people were not buying in a free market system, they couldn't maintain higher costs, prices to the consumer. They'd have to bring them down to be able to sell their goods.
well, yeah, Milton Friedman, well-renowned economist, would have said that inflation is a monetary phenomenon. And it occurs because the velocity of money, or the speed at which money is being created in an economy, outpaces output. So what you have is more people wanting to buy than more suppliers are able to supply. So when demand starts outpacing supply, pardon me, you have to have prices be that adjusting factor. Because I think what people forget, and I love sports analogies for this reason, when you think of a Thunder basketball game, if they're in the championship, there's a limited capacity. And so if I want a ticket to a championship game, so when I think it's 2012, they were in the championship, there's a limited number of seats. So the only way to determine who values that seat the most or who's going to go to that game is the price level starts to increase significantly. And so the consumers that value it the most will go to the game. But people, when they go to the grocery store, don't seem to perceive scarcity that same way. They forget that those Fritos are a scarce good. They're not unlimited. And so when production isn't keeping up with demand, the price starts to go up. And that's how you can allocate the scarce resources.
Well, does this mean that at least after you pass a certain point that the free market is not successfully monitoring what's going on?
Well, I think I'm a big believer in the free market.
Yeah, as am I.
And I think supply and demand do a great job of allocating scarce resources, because otherwise you'd have to plan how much to make, who gets what, and how much. So that's actually probably more challenging, in my opinion, when you start having to plan out an economy. But the great thing about a market is when you have supply and demand determining what's produced, how much, it really encourages innovation as well. So it's kind of a survival of the fittest. Now, does that say that there should never be some intervention into a market economy? Mm-hmm. There are market failures. There are times where a market doesn't succeed. You might think of natural monopolies. So your local electric utility, they could never be a competitive market. And so you do have to do some things that regulate their price structure, because they would be kind of an uncontested monopoly. And there are times where you have what I call externalities. So, the way I'll define that is it causes a benefit or a harm to people that aren't using the good, or they're not part of the market. And so yes, there's times that there needs to be some kind of correction by a government entity into that.
But in 2020 and 2021, the federal government started putting a lot of money into the system. People were not able to work because of the pandemic, and so employers were subsidized, and then individuals were subsidized. Isn't that what's caused much of the problem that we're now experiencing?
Well, that definitely has something to do with what's part of the problem. Because again,
well, why didn't we see that coming more clearly?
I hate to say it this way, but I did. I really did back when I started seeing huge stimulus packages, and I saw that for a time consumers weren't spending a lot of money with COVID. They're kind of saving, and then you see producers aren't producing as much because they're shutting down through COVID. Well, now you've got this buildup of demand, and you're giving consumers more money. Again, if demand exceeds what's being produced, that's inflation.
So was it too much money too soon?
I think it was. I think that's part of it.
Yeah.
A lot of money very quickly, and at the same time with producers that weren't producing as much, and you weren't seeing as many people in the workforce.
This sounds like that old saying on the first day of economics class when they say, there's no such thing as a free lunch.
Couldn't have said it better.
The government was trying to give us a free lunch, and we took it.
Yes.
And then we find out now that it wasn't a free lunch. There's a price to be paid down the line.
I found the free lunch was good, and I ate it, and I gained weight accordingly.
And not to say this too politically, but when you think of policies that are being talked about now, say the student loan forgiveness, which $30 billion over 10, per year for 10 years, that's more money that goes into a consumer's pocket they're going to spend. So now they may save us some as well, but again, that would be a push that's going to increase aggregate demand, which again pushes price levels up. So when you say there's no such thing as a free lunch, that's a perfect economic statement because it shows you at all times there's trade-offs and kind of cause and effect for the decisions you make.
Let's get to a break. We're visiting with Dr. Jeremy Oller, and we're discussing inflation, and then we're going to discuss all the great work that's going on in UCO's business school. We'll be right back.
At Whitten Burridge, we're litigators. That's all we do. All of our clients, some sort of wrong has occurred to them. We try to right that wrong. Corporate America, they have all the power. It's sort of like going against an army. I like helping the underdog. That's what gets me up out of bed every day.
Our success rate is phenomenal, but that's not all they get. We care about people.
I'm very proud of what we've been able to do for our clients, and I'm looking forward to what we're going to do in the future. There's still a lot of wrongs that need to be righted.
One of the best kept secrets about the post 9/11 GI Bill benefit is that it can be used at a trade school or a technical school, and it doesn't have to be used at a university or college. These are benefits that the veterans have earned through their service, and they should take advantage of it.
Veterans really need to understand that there are many resources offered by the Oklahoma Department of Veteran Affairs. They're there to help you find the right school for you, the school that will help you and your family make great steps into your future.
OU Law has a history and heritage that are unparalleled. At the University of Oklahoma College of Law, we empower our students to pursue the career of their dreams. We have the highest U.S. News ranking ever achieved by an Oklahoma law school. We are the first law school in the country to launch a college-wide digital initiative. And this year, our competition teams rank number 2 in the nation. OU Law, generations of excellence, limitless possibilities.
We're back on The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Meyers and our guest Jeremy Oller.
Jeremy, just briefly, you used the term the Fed 2 or 3 times in your discussion a minute ago. Tell our viewers what you mean and who is that, who is the Fed, and what power do they have over inflation?
Yeah, so when I'm referring to the Fed, it's usually the Federal Reserve System, and so you're talking about a policy board that's essentially trying to target, and they have a couple of operations, but they mostly are targeting interest rates. And they conduct open market operations as well as kind of set the federal funds rate, which a lot of people may have heard. But the Fed focuses on what's called monetary policy. So there's two ways you could probably attack inflation, one being fiscal policy or doing it through government, and you would go through, say, taxes or government spending. But monetary policy is really trying to adjust lending and trying to look at what's the cost of borrowing money from banks. And so two common ways they might try to work with inflation or try to bring it down would be, first, they're selling or buying into the open market operations. So if they're selling, what they're doing is they're requiring banks to kind of buy treasury notes, which takes money out of the banks, so they don't have as much money to lend. And if they don't have as much money to lend, then the price of borrowing goes up. And so that's what I think you've seen recently is, I think just this past week, they've announced that another 0.5% basis point increase. So it's going to cost more to borrow money, which means as a consumer or as a business, if I were wanting to invest in my plant or equipment, it's now more expensive to borrow money, so maybe I don't purchase things now. The second thing they can do is they can adjust the federal funds rate, which is kind of their rate that that banks loaned other banks on an overnight basis. So one bank may be looking to borrow money to lend out, but if a bank's having to pay a higher cost to do that, then it again becomes more expensive for them to lend money.
So the Fed is basically the brake that you step on when you want to slow the inflation bus down.
Simplified, it can. I mean,
or
they
speed
can
it up.
Or they can speed it up. So yeah, when you saw recessions in 2008, they were pushing down those interest rates.
Yeah.
And the reason was they were trying to spur economic activity and get people to borrow money.
Okay.
How much does politics play into all this and election cycles?
Oh, I'm not a great politician, but it does. Yeah. It most certainly does. And I think, and not just in terms of just the actual political decision makers, but I think expectations. Because you start to see a lot of criticism or support for policies through the news, through the media. So I think in every way it affects it.
So over the next 12 months, when we watch the news and they talk about what the Fed is doing or what's happening in Washington, what should we expect to see? What's the forecast here?
Oh, my forecast is I think they'll still try to combat inflation. I think that's probably what they're getting a little bit fearful of. But my concern is, I mentioned student loans earlier, I think they're still doing policies that I'm not sure are the right ones.
Yeah, feel good, no such thing as a free lunch policy.
Yeah, that would be one. And the second thing, if you ask me, one thing I think we have to focus on is getting individuals back to work. I mean, really, because as you start to see those wages increase, that also is a factor in inflation.
See, these seem like such basic concepts.
They are.
People should work.
People should work, and it is a basic concept.
And people shouldn't just be handed free money or incentives from government unnecessarily.
Well, there's a cost to it. So it's not free.
Right.
There's always a trade-off. I remember I was saying this to my wife, actually, when they started announcing stimulus after stimulus. Mm-hmm. I said, what I find scary is the people that they're trying to help the most now are the people that are going to hurt the most later.
Let's switch now to your role in higher ed. UCO is seeing declining enrollment and belt tightening, and so you're seeing all these economic forces at play inside your own world. So what do you think when you start seeing these things at work, and how do you take off one role of being the economist and one role of being inside an institution that's dealing with a lot of these same economic structures?
Well, I still try to be the economist there too, and advise how do we address this problem, because again, it's back to supply and demand. I think at UCO, one of our big strategic advantages is that we had that value proposition. We had a great education, but we weren't as expensive as the R1 institutions of OU and OSU, which have great brand names. Mm-hmm. But we probably weren't as we weren't as cheap as, say, a community college, but I think we added a lot of value there. And I think over time, what we've seen is the price of tuition go up and up and up, to where I think that hurts our university in particular, because if we start to get too close to OU, they have a brand name that a lot of students may want to go to OU at that point.
I mean, universities buy a lot of goods and services, and then faculty will frequently ask for an increase in compensation. All of that's going to raise the price of tuition, and then fewer people are likely to choose this school over another school. And so you have all of these forces at work here. And how are we doing at UCO at trying to figure out the best way to balance all that?
Well, the tough thing at UCO, and I work in a college of business, so faculty salaries haven't increased for a decade. And so I think that is kind of concern for my faculty. And really, in a university, the faculty are the difference makers. They're going to be the ones that come up with the innovations. They're going to be the ones in the classroom with the student. And so if you're going to have a great reputation for teaching or research, they're going to be the ones providing you that reputation. So my goal is really to make sure our faculty are well supported and that we get the best talent possible, because that makes a difference for our learners. And so, not if compensation isn't going up, especially in inflationary times, they start to feel it, and it's frustrating for them. And, my goal is to make sure they're very happy when they're in a classroom.
Talk a little bit, pardon me, about COVID and how it's affected the quality of education, not simply at your place, but around, everywhere.
It changed everything. So you went from a model just in one day. I still remember having to go virtual all of a sudden, and no one was set up for it. So at the time, I had like a gaming headset and an old camera that I had to turn out the lights in the room so people could see me walk right on the board. But it was kind of archaic how I was doing it, but just so I could teach them and they could still see me. But now it caused us to invest in a lot of technology where we can do more distance-based learning, or really where they're not having to be on campus as much. So it's changed, but I'm still a big advocate that the classroom experience provides something special and value beyond trying to learn something just online.
Well, COVID, I guess, today is not mandating distance learning. Your students are in the classroom.
Oh, they are, yes. We're back to normal. So, but I would say you've seen a shift towards more online learning.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There's this trend of males not going to universities at the same level that they used to. What's behind that, and what's your rebuttal when you hear a young man say that he's going to choose to do something else as opposed to going to university?
I've seen that number. Even at UCO, I believe the number is 60% female, and I don't know why. I really, I've never understood it, but I also never understood why, say, you don't see more females in, say, the math and sciences or in business. So I've wondered myself, why aren't young men deciding that college is for them? I don't know, maybe they're deciding that, especially now with the cost of education, it could be that working in a trade provides more opportunity for someone.
Okay, well, we got just under a minute and a half.
Sure.
Let's hear your pitch for high school seniors that are looking for a future in or outside of higher ed. What should they be looking at?
Oh, what I would be looking at is something that provides a great return on their investment. Something where, because college is an investment in themselves. So pick a program, pick a school that they're going to get out of, build connections, and have a successful career so that they're actually getting a positive return. So I would pick a discipline. And if I'm advising, and as a business dean, I would say finance, accounting, human resources. These are all professions or professional selling even. They're providing great returns on student investments, and I think at the end of the day, that's why a lot of students go to university.
Well, a lot of fine universities in the state of Oklahoma, including UCO. Thanks for your work, and please pass along our appreciation to your staff.
Will do. Thank you.
Tell Travis hello.
I will do that as well.
Kent and I will have a final word when we get back.
This is the epidemic of my generation. This is my HIV. This is my Black Plague.
In the midst of one of our state's largest crises,
Oklahomans are dying from this preventable and treatable disease on a daily basis.
We believe there's hope.
That little pill will cause destruction through your whole life.
Watch the entire award-winning 9-part docuseries Killing Pain, made available by Fighting Addiction Through Education at killingpain.com.
It used to be okay in hospitals. It used to be okay in movie theaters. It was okay in classrooms, restaurants, and airplanes. But thanks to a greater understanding of the dangers, that's not okay anymore. So now that we know secondhand smoke causes lifelong health problems, why is it still okay to smoke with children in the car? Bottom line, it's not okay. Let's get serious about protecting kids. Join the fight at stopswithme.com.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
You will always be mom and dad to me.
You have children coming from a different lifestyle, different mindset. You have to open your arms and really do what you have to do to have that child become a part of your family. And if it's more patience, that's what you do. Kids got to know they can trust you. And that's what we've tried to do with these kids.
You will always be mom and dad to me.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. We're wrapping up the show. We dealt with inflation and business schools and all the good things going on at UCO with Dr. Jeremy Oller.
Yeah, Jeremy is just a fine person. He's a great teacher. As a matter of fact, when I try antitrust cases, he's one of the people I call on to explain difficult economic principles to juries, and he does a marvelous job there. I think the people, all I can speak about are the people I know in the business school at UCO, but they're a fine bunch.
Absolutely. We appreciate Dr. Oller coming on our show, and we'd also like to give you some website information. You can get more information on the work of he and his staff out at UCO, and their website is uco.edu. That's uco.edu. And we have a website. It's theverdict.tv. Log on and tell us about a guest you'd like to see or a subject you'd like to see us discuss on a future edition, and we'll get to it when we can. That's going to do it for this week's show. For Kent Meyers, I'm Mick Cornett. We'll see you next week on another edition of The Verdict.
Happy New Year.